Chair, speakers, guests. So can you guess my favourite bird? Like a big white bird flying high in the sky. She was sheer beauty. People travelled for miles just to gaze at her unique design and breathtaking elegance. Children cheered whenever they spotted her. Hundreds of local residents flocked to Castle Donington in the 70s just to see her come into land, and then all too soon rise into the sky once more. So, have you worked out which particular bird I'm referring to? Shall I show you? Of course, it can be really no other. She is, of course, Concorde. How many of you here tonight were actually lucky enough to have flown on Concorde? Well, this evening I'd like to share with you a few interesting facts about this engineering marvel, and then give you some idea what it was like to have been a passenger on this amazing aircraft. So let me share my screen so I can show you some pictures. The plane was the result of perhaps rare Anglo-French collaboration, and the name Concorde was first used by President de Gaulle in 1963. The British initially spelt it without the E on the end, but in 1967 Tony Benn announced that Britain would adopt the French spelling and quash nationalistic protests by proclaiming that the E stood for excellence, England, Europe, and not least entente cordiale. When an irate Scotsman demanded to know what the E represented for his country, Benn replied that it was Écosse, the French word for Scotland. Concorde's beautiful delta wings not only epitomised speed by reducing drag, but provided sufficient lift for takeoff and landing at subsonic speeds, and gave enough stability during flight to do away with the need for stabilisers on the tail. The reason for Concorde's droopy nose was that its shape was designed for maximum aerodynamic efficiency, but the consequence was that whilst moving the plane on the ground, the pilots couldn't actually see the tarmac, so it was designed to tilt by 13 degrees to aid manoeuvrability around airports. There were actually 20 aircraft built, although only 14 entered airline service, the others being prototypes and pre-production models. In 1977, the airlines paid around $23 million for each aircraft, which is about $200 million at today's values. Two final Concordes were eventually sold for £1 and €1 each. Now, that might have been a good buy, but perhaps your running costs would have proved to have been a bit too expensive, as it used up to 5,638 gallons of fuel per hour. Concorde normally cruised at 60,000 feet, or twice the height of Mount Everest. But it was the speed that was the real thrill, travelling at Mach 2, 1,350 miles per hour, or twice the speed of sound. And of course it was this speed that reduced the typical journey time from London to New York of 7.5 hours in a jumbo down to 3 hours and 20 minutes, meaning you arrived before you took off in local time. I found it fascinating that Concorde always took off from Heathrow at 11 AM sharp and had complete priority. All other flights had to wait and let Concorde take off exactly on schedule every day. Owing to air compression in the front of the plane as it travelled at supersonic speed, the fuselage heated up and expanded by as much as 300 millimetres or 12 inches. The most obvious consequence of this was that a gap that opened up on the flight deck between the flight engineer's console and the bulkhead. On some of the last flights, the flight engineers placed their caps in this expanded gap, so when the plane landed, the cap was completely wedged in it when it shrank back down again. You can see the result in this photograph, and since the planes have never flown again, it remains permanently wedged in. The plane had seats for 100 passengers, though in rows of 4 seats across and numbered from 1 to 26. Now I'm sure the mathematicians like James will immediately let you know that 4 times 26 equals 104. True, of course, but so as not to upset superstitious passengers, there was no row 13. The only thing that tells you that you're moving is that occasionally when you're flying over the subsonic aeroplanes, you can see all these 747s 20,000 feet below you, almost appearing to go backwards. I mean, you are going 800 miles an hour or thereabouts faster than they are. Concorde apparently was an absolute delight to fly. It handled beautifully. And remember, we are talking about an aeroplane that was being designed in the late 1950s to mid-1960s. I think it's absolutely amazing that here we are now in the 21st century and it remains unique. This was also before the use of computers, and in fact all the engineering drawings were done by highly skilled draftsmen, some of whom you can see here. But I'm sure you'd like to know what it was like to be on this plane. Well, on the 10th of May 1998, we stepped on board for our own flight at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The plane accelerated down the runway for what seemed to be an age, and we were pressed back into our seats. But then she rose so smoothly, and we were airborne. Shortly afterwards, we were served a meal. Lobster tail and grilled salmon, served with tropical mango, kiwi fruit and melon. This was followed by chocolate charlotte on a bed of crème anglaise. Finally we were served breast bleu and Merce cheese with crackers and butter. We headed out towards the Bay of Biscay, where once free of land and over water, we were able to accelerate, and everybody looked at the display screen to see when we had broken the sound barrier. But all too soon we were coming into land at Heathrow, and although I hate the phrase, this had been, for us at least, truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. On the 10th of April 2003, BA and Air France simultaneously announced that they would retire Concorde later that year. They were proving to be no longer commercially viable. So it seems if you didn't do it when we did, your opportunity of flying on Concorde again have gone forever. But, interestingly, when I was bringing this speech up to date, I learned that Emirates have ambitious plans to fly Concorde again. With the guidance of Airbus engineers who worked on Concorde, Emirates plans to test their first Concorde in 2021. However, restoring them will cost a lot of money. Various aviation experts predict that it will cost between $15 and $20 million to make a single Concorde fly again. Yet, knowing this, Emirates are prepared to invest the required funds. The airline has set its first steps on the road ahead, and has already purchased 2 former Air France Concordes, and 2 more are coming from the UK. They have plans to fly them from Dubai to London, New York, Singapore and Delhi. Their ambitious plan is to have the inaugural flight as early as 2022. To see one of the most influential aircraft in the history of aviation again in the sky is amazing. In addition, there might be a small chance of us stepping inside a Concorde, not just in a museum, but actually flying in one, which is much more exciting. So you never know, my big white bird may yet be back in the sky where it belongs.